Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take complex research, cut through the noise, and really deliver the insights you need to be well-informed. Today, we're tackling a condition that affects literally hundreds of millions around the globe, often silently. It impacts health, quality of life, and significantly raises the risk of serious diseases. We're talking about obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA.
It really is a massive hidden burden. When people hear sleep apnea, they often just think about loud snoring, maybe something that annoys a partner. But the clinical picture is, frankly, much darker. OSA involves repeated collapses of the upper airway during sleep. This means breathing pauses, leading to these intermittent drops in oxygen.
And those oxygen drops, over time, they add up.
They absolutely do. They act as triggers for really serious chronic health problems. We see direct links between OSA and conditions like high blood pressure, stroke, heart problems, even type 2 diabetes. It's a condition that can have severe long-term consequences.
And for years, decades really, the main treatment for moderate to severe cases has been the CPAP machine, continuous positive airway pressure. Mechanically, it's brilliant. It basically acts like an air splint to keep the airway open. But there's a huge real-world hurdle.
There is. It requires wearing a pressurized mask every night, all night, and the data is pretty stark. Up to half of all patients just can't stick with it long term.
That's incredible. Why such a high dropout rate?
Well, common reasons are finding the mask uncomfortable, the noise can be disruptive, or the air pressure itself just feels intolerable. So they end up discontinuing it, often within the first year.
So you've got this strange situation, a treatment that works incredibly well mechanically, but fails for half the people who need it because they just can't use it. They're left sort of stranded without good options.
Exactly. It's a clinical paradox. And that's precisely why the medical community has been, frankly, desperate for a simpler, non-mechanical alternative. A drug that could potentially treat the underlying causes.
And that really sets the stage for our deep dive today. We're going to unpack the results of a really quite groundbreaking Phase 2 European clinical trial. It's called the FLO trial. It tested a drug called Sulthiame. And the findings, which were recently published in The Lancet, they offer some of the strongest evidence we've seen yet that a pill, a pharmacological solution for sleep apnea, might finally be within reach.
It's potentially a huge shift.
So we're going to look at how this drug works, what the FLO drug trial actually found, the hard data, and why experts are calling this a potential paradigm shift in sleep medicine. Okay, let's dig into that paradigm shift. Because traditionally, like you said, sleep apnea is often framed as purely an anatomical issue. Maybe someone's overweight, their throat structure is narrow, you need a physical fix, like CPAP.
With the pneumatic splint idea.
Exactly. But Sulthiame, this drug we're talking about, it works on the body's internal chemistry. So how can a pill fix what seems like a physical plumbing problem?
That's really the key insight from the last decade or so of sleep research. We now understand OSA is much more complex. It's heterogeneous, meaning it's not just one single thing. Yes, anatomy matters, how collapsible the airway is, but there are other critical factors involved.
Okay, so it's not just the pipes.
Not just the pipes. There are at least 3 other key physiological traits often involved. First, there's how well the upper airway muscles function or don't function. The muscles that should keep the throat open during sleep can become sluggish.
Right, muscle function. What else?
Second, there's something called a low arousal threshold. Basically, how easily someone wakes up. If you wake up too easily from minor disturbances, it fragments your sleep, even if you don't fully stop breathing. And the third factor, which is really relevant for Sulthiame, is instability in breathing control. Technically, it's called high ventilatory loop gain.
High loop gain. Okay, that sounds technical, but you said it's crucial for understanding how a drug like Sulthiame could work. Can you break that down for us? Maybe an analogy.
Sure. Think of your brain's breathing control center like a thermostat in your house, but a really, really sensitive one, maybe even a bit faulty. When you fall asleep, your metabolism slows down. Breathing naturally becomes a bit shallower. In most people, the thermostat responds smoothly, making small adjustments.
Okay, makes sense.
But in someone with high loop gain, that thermostat is hyper-responsive. If their blood oxygen dips even slightly or carbon dioxide changes just a tiny bit, the system massively overreacts. It slams on the accelerator, causing a big surge in breathing effort, like a gasp or hyperventilation.
So the overcorrection is the actual problem, not just the initial dip.
Precisely. That big surge in breathing blows off too much carbon dioxide, and low carbon dioxide is actually a signal for the brain to stop breathing. So you get an apnea, a pause until CO2 builds back up, then the cycle repeats. Dip, overcorrect, blow off CO2, stop breathing.
A vicious cycle.
Exactly. It leads to this unstable pattern, clusters of breathing events. And because this instability has a neurochemical basis, targeting it pharmacologically with a drug is a really attractive idea. It's seen as one of the key non-CPAP targets.
Right. So that brings us to Sulthiame, sometimes called Sulthiame. You mentioned it's not a brand new molecule designed just for sleep apnea.
Correct. It has a history. Sulthiame is an existing medication already approved in some parts of the world for treating certain types of childhood epilepsy. Its repurposing for OSA is quite clever, really, because its known mechanism of action fits so well with this high loop gain problem. Sulthiame is a potent carbonic anhydrase inhibitor.
Carbonic anhydrase. That sounds like a pretty fundamental enzyme.
It is. It's crucial for how the body manages acid-base balance, and critically, it plays a big role in sensing and regulating carbon dioxide levels and breathing control, especially in the brainstem. By inhibiting this enzyme, Sulthiame subtly changes the body's internal chemistry around breathing control.
Okay, so inhibiting this enzyme, what does that actually do to someone with sleep apnea? It sounds like it might tackle several issues at once.
That's exactly why it's promising. Inhibiting carbonic anhydrase seems to do three key things that fight OSA. First, and most importantly for this discussion, it dampens that high loop gain. It makes the breathing thermostat less twitchy, less prone to those big overcorrections, stabilizing the system.
So smoother breathing control.
Smoother control. Second, the drug causes a very mild shift in the body's acid-base balance, a mild metabolic acidosis, which actually acts as a gentle, constant stimulus to breathe. It encourages a slightly deeper, more consistent respiratory drive overall.
Interesting. So it stabilizes and stimulates breathing.
In a way, yes. And third, there's evidence from earlier, smaller studies suggesting Sulthiame also improves the activity and tone of those upper airway muscles we mentioned earlier. Stiffer muscles mean the throat is physically less likely to collapse, especially during vulnerable periods like REM sleep.
Wow, okay. So one pill potentially hitting three core problems: the unstable control system, the overall drive to breathe, and the physical floppiness of the airway muscles. That's quite elegant.
It really is. It targets the neurochemistry and seems to have a positive effect on the mechanics, too. It really validates this idea that OSA isn't just plumbing. It's complex physiology that we might be able to modulate with medication.
That mechanism sounds incredibly promising on paper. But like you said, theory is one thing, proving it in people is another. Let's shift focus now to the FLOW trial itself. This was the phase 2 study that generated all this excitement.
Right. The proof is in the pudding, as they say.
We often hear these terms thrown around for clinical trials: randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled. Can we just quickly unpack why the design of the FLOW study is so important for trusting the results?
Absolutely. It's sometimes called the alphabet soup of trial design, but each piece is there for a reason: to ensure scientific rigor. FLOW was multi-center. That means it wasn't just done in one hospital. It involved 28 different sites across 5 European countries: Belgium, the Czech Republic, France, Germany, and Spain.
Why does involving multiple countries matter?
It suggests the findings aren't just specific to one healthcare system or one particular group of doctors. If the drug works consistently across different places, you have more confidence it's a real effect.
Okay. And then the double-blind, placebo-controlled part. That's the gold standard, isn't it?
It is. Double-blind means neither the patients taking part nor the doctors treating them knew who was getting the actual Sulthiame drug versus who was getting a placebo, an identical-looking sugar pill. Placebo-controlled means you compare the drug directly against that sugar pill. This whole setup eliminates bias and the patient's expectation they should get better, or the doctor's hope that the drug works.
Makes sense. Let's talk about who was in the study. You mentioned 298 adults. What kind of sleep apnea did they have? Were they typical patients?
They enrolled adults aged 18 to 75, all of whom had untreated moderate to severe OSA. That means their Apnoea-Hypopnea Index, or AHI, the number of breathing pauses per hour, was significantly elevated. But, and this is important, the study population was quite specific in other ways. The average body mass index, the BMI, was around 29.1. That puts the average participant in the overweight category, just below the official threshold for obesity.
And you mentioned a key group was excluded.
Yes. For safety reasons, especially in this relatively early phase 2 trial, patients who were severely obese, defined as a BMI over 35, were deliberately excluded. They also excluded people over 75. And it's worth noting the final group was mostly male, around 74%, and didn't have a lot of ethnic diversity. This selectivity helps isolate the drug's effect initially, but it's a big point we'll need to come back to when thinking about real-world use.
Right. So they were testing it first in a relatively cleaner, moderately affected group to really see the signal clearly and ensure safety before trying it in more complex patients. How were these 298 people divided up?
They were randomly assigned, using a computer, into one of 4 groups of roughly equal size. It was a 1-to-1 to 1-to-1 ratio. One group got the placebo. The other 3 groups got Sulthiame, but at different doses. 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, or 300 milligrams.
But they took this once a day?
Yes, once daily at bedtime. The trial lasted 15 weeks in total. There was a short period at the beginning to gradually increase the dose, and then they stayed on their assigned target dose for the final 12 weeks.
Okay. And the main thing they were measuring, the primary goal, was the change in that AHI score, the breathing interruptions per hour.
Yeah.
But the researchers used a specific definition, AHI-3A, correct? Why that particular measure?
Yes, that's a crucial detail. AHI-3A. Standard AHI often counts only breathing pauses, apneas, or significant drops in breathing hypopneas that cause at least a 4% drop in blood oxygen. AHI-3A is a bit stricter, or perhaps more sensitive. It counts events that cause either a slightly smaller 3% oxygen drop or events that lead to an arousal, a brief awakening from sleep.
So why is capturing those arousals important, even if the oxygen dip isn't huge?
Because those arousals are what fragment sleep. They disrupt sleep architecture, prevent restorative sleep, and are a major reason why patients feel tired and foggy during the day, even if their oxygen levels don't look absolutely terrible. By using AHI-3A, the researchers were really setting a higher bar. They weren't just looking for fewer big oxygen drops. They wanted to see if the drug could reduce the overall sleep disruption that impacts quality of life.
That makes sense. And one last methodological point, ensuring consistency across those 28 sites in 5 countries. How did they make sure everyone was measuring the AHI the same way?
That's a really important point for a multi-center trial. They used central scoring for all the sleep studies, the polysomnography. Instead of having each hospital analyze its own sleep study data, all the raw data was sent to a central expert reading center. The same trained team scored every single study using the exact same criteria. This removes any potential differences in interpretation between sites and makes the final comparison between the drug doses and placebo much more reliable.
Okay, so a very rigorously designed study, setting the stage for hopefully clear results.
And the results were indeed quite clear and quite exciting.
So after those 15 weeks, did the drug actually work? Did it reduce the AHI score?
Yes, it did. And importantly, it worked in a dose-dependent manner. The more drug people took, the bigger the effect, generally speaking. Compared to the placebo group, the lowest dose, 100 milligrams, showed a reduction in AHI of about 16.4%. Which is okay, but maybe not earth-shattering.
But the higher doses?
That's where it got really interesting. The 200 milligram dose achieved a reduction of 30.2% in AHI compared to placebo, and the highest dose, 300 milligrams, reduced AHI by 34.6%. Both of those reductions were statistically significant, meaning unlikely to be due to chance.
Okay, reducing breathing events by about a third with a pill. That sounds significant. How does that compare conceptually to something like CPAP? CPAP aims for almost complete elimination, right?
Right. CPAP, when used perfectly, can get the AHI down close to zero in many patients. So a 30-35% reduction isn't a cure in the same way, but, and this is a big but, in the world of drug development for OSA, where previous attempts have often failed or had marginal effects, achieving this level of reduction is genuinely seen as monumental.
Why monumental?
Because it proves the concept. It shows that targeting this physiological pathway, the loop gain, the muscle tone, can make a meaningful difference. It opens the door. But the story isn't just about the average percentage drop. The researchers also looked at something arguably more relevant clinically. What proportion of patients had a really substantial improvement?
Okay, how do they define substantial improvement in this case?
They used 2 criteria. A patient was considered a substantial responder if they either had at least a 50% reduction in their individual AHI score, or if their AHI dropped below 15 events per hour.
Why is dropping below 15 significant?
Because an AHI of 15 is often the threshold used to distinguish moderate to severe OSA from mild OSA. If you can get someone below that threshold, you're potentially moving them into a much lower risk category for long-term health consequences.
Right. So what percentage of patients hit that mark in the Sulthiame groups?
The numbers here are really encouraging. In the 200 milligram group, 45% of patients, almost half, met this definition of substantial improvement. In the 300 milligram group, it was even slightly higher, 49%.
And compared to placebo?
In the placebo group, only about 25% saw that level of improvement, which can happen just due to natural variability or placebo effect. So essentially, taking the higher doses of Sulthiame roughly doubled a patient's chances of having a clinically meaningful response compared to taking nothing.
That's a much more compelling way to look at it. It's not just tweaking averages, it's potentially changing the disease category for a large chunk of patients.
Exactly. It's moving the needle in a way that matters for prognosis.
Beyond just the AHI number, what about those other objective measures? Things related to heart health, like oxygen levels and sleep quality itself.
The secondary outcomes really backed up the primary findings. First, oxygenation. They looked at the Oxygen Desaturation Index, or ODI, which measures how often oxygen levels dip significantly overnight. The study confirmed improvements in overnight oxygenation in the Sulthiame groups compared to placebo. Less nocturnal hypoxia, those damaging oxygen dips, means less stress on the cardiovascular system. That's critical.
And what about sleep fragmentation? Did people sleep more soundly, objectively?
Yes, the data showed that too. They measured the total arousal index, how many times people were briefly woken up per hour. Both the 200 milligrams and 300 milligram groups showed statistically significant reductions in arousals compared to placebo. We're talking about roughly 6 to 7 fewer arousals per hour in those higher dose groups. That indicates more consolidated, less fragmented sleep, which should translate to feeling more rested.
Which is often the main goal for the patient.
Absolutely. And one other specific point about sleep quality, REM sleep. Rapid eye movement sleep is crucial for memory, learning, emotional regulation. Some drugs experimented with for sleep or breathing can unfortunately suppress REM sleep.
Did Sulthiame have that problem?
Encouragingly, no. The analysis showed that Sulthiame did not cause any clinically significant reduction in the amount of REM sleep patients were getting. So it seems to be improving breathing quality without messing up the natural restorative stages of sleep architecture. That's a really positive finding.
Okay, so the objective numbers look good. Fewer breathing events, better oxygen, less fragmented sleep. But the million-dollar question for many patients is, will I actually feel less tired during the day? Here, right. You mentioned earlier that up to half of people with OSA suffer from excessive daytime sleepiness. How did Sulthiame perform on that subjective front?
Right. This is where we look at patient-reported outcomes, usually measured with something called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, or ESS. And here, the results were a bit more nuanced. We need to talk about something called a floor effect.
A floor effect. What does that mean in this context?
Okay, imagine you're testing a drug designed to make people run faster. If you give it to a group of Olympic sprinters, they might not get much faster, right? They're already near their peak performance. There's not much room for improvement. They're near the floor of potential improvement.
Ah, okay. So the people in the FLO trial, on average, weren't starting out feeling extremely sleepy.
Exactly. While they all had objective OSA based on their sleep studies, the average participant entering the trial didn't actually report debilitating levels of daytime sleepiness on the ESS score at the beginning. Their baseline scores weren't that high. So across the entire study group, it was difficult to show a statistically significant improvement in sleepiness simply because many weren't that sleepy to begin with. There wasn't much room on the scale to show improvement.
So did the researchers look specifically at the people who were actually sleepy at the start?
Yes, and this was crucial. They did what's called a pre-specified subgroup analysis. They planned in advance to look just at the patients who entered the trial with excessive daytime sleepiness, defined as an ESS score of 11 or higher. That was about 40% of the participants.
And what did they find in that specific group, the ones who were genuinely impaired by sleepiness?
In that subgroup, the 200 milligram dose of Sulthiame did show a statistically significant improvement in their ESS scores compared to placebo. This is really important. It suggests that for the patients who are actually suffering from daytime sleepiness as a major symptom, the drug likely does help them feel better.
That distinction is key. It's targeting the relief to those who need it most, rather than just looking at an overall average that might mask the benefit.
Precisely. It connects the objective improvements in breathing and sleep fragmentation back to the patient's subjective experience of feeling more alert.
Before we move on to safety, I want to quickly circle back to the cardiovascular side. OSA is so tightly linked to high blood pressure. Did the trial hint at any potential blood pressure benefits from Sulthiame, even though it was relatively short?
Yes, there were some promising signals there, although we need to be cautious because the trial was only 15 weeks long, really too short to prove definitive long-term cardiovascular effects. However, they did observe what they called a non-significant trend towards blood pressure reduction in the higher dose groups. For instance, the 200 milligram group saw an average drop in systolic blood pressure of about 3.2 millimeters of mercury compared to the placebo group.
3 points might not sound like a lot, but consistently reducing blood pressure even by that much could be really beneficial long-term, especially in a population prone to hypertension.
Absolutely. If further, longer studies confirm that Sulthiame not only treats the sleep apnea itself, but also helps lower blood pressure even modestly, that would be a massive added benefit. It could position it as a tool for managing overall cardiovascular risk, potentially offering an advantage over CPAP in that specific regard for some patients. It's definitely an area to watch closely in future research.
Okay, the efficacy data, especially for the 200 milligram dose, looks really promising, both objectively and subjectively for those who need it most. But for a drug someone might take every single day for years, maybe decades, safety and tolerability are paramount. You mentioned earlier that adverse events increased with the dose. Let's dig into that safety profile. What were people experiencing?
Right, that's always the crucial trade-off with any medication. The incidence of side effects did go up pretty clearly with the dose. It was around 61% in the placebo group. You always see some background level in trials, but it climbed up to 91% in the group taking the highest dose, 300 milligrams.
Wow, 91%. Were these serious side effects?
Fortunately, the vast majority were classified as mild or moderate in severity. There weren't major safety alarms in that sense, but they were clearly noticeable for many patients.
What was the most common issue people reported?
By far, the most frequent side effect reported was something called paresthesia. It's a characteristic side effect of this class of drugs, the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Paresthesia is that sensation of tingling or pins and needles, often felt in the hands, feet, or sometimes around the mouth.
Ah, okay. Was that strongly related to the dose?
Very strongly. Only about 9% of people in the placebo group reported it, which might just be random background sensations. But that jumped significantly in the drug groups. In the 300 milligram group, 57%, well over half the participants reported experiencing paresthesia.
Over half experiencing tingling? Was it severe? Did it make people want to stop the drug?
Most reports were classified as mild, about 99 out of the 118 total events reported. But even if mild, a constant or frequent tingling sensation can certainly be bothersome and impact quality of life. And yes, it definitely seems to have impacted adherence. Adverse events, with paresthesia likely being the main culprit, were the primary reason people dropped out of the study early.
How did the dropout rates look across the different doses?
Again, a clear dose relationship. Only about 11% of the placebo group stopped the study drug early, but that figure climbed steadily with the Sulthiame dose, reaching 24%, almost 1 in 4 patients in the 300 milligram group who discontinued treatment due to side effects.
Okay, so that presents a real clinical dilemma. The 300 milligram dose gave the numerically highest reduction in AHI, about 35%. But if nearly a quarter of people can't tolerate it, is that extra 4 or 5% efficacy compared to the 200 milligram dose really worth it?
That's the core question of dose optimization, isn't it? You're weighing the marginal gain in efficacy against a significant drop in tolerability and adherence. For a chronic condition like OSA, where people need to take the medication consistently long-term, having a quarter of patients quit due to side effects is generally considered unacceptable. It undermines the whole point of the treatment.
So, did the researchers or experts involved draw a conclusion about which dose hit the best balance, the sweet spot?
Yes, they did. After carefully analyzing the benefit, the reduction in AHI, the improved oxygenation, the reduction in arousals against the risk that side effects, particularly paresthesia, and the dropout rates, the clear consensus emerged. The 200 milligram daily dose was judged to have the most favorable benefit-risk ratio for this particular group of patients studied. It delivered that robust, clinically meaningful 30% reduction in AHI, with a much more manageable side effect profile and lower discontinuation rate compared to the 300 milligram dose.
So 200 milligrams seems to be the dose to likely take forward into larger, longer trials.
That seems to be the logical conclusion based on this phase 2 data, yes. It offers substantial efficacy without the tolerability issues that plague the highest dose.
All right, let's zoom out now and think about the bigger picture. We have this successful phase 2 trial. It shows, quite convincingly, that this pill, Sulthiame, can target some of the underlying physiological drivers of sleep apnea. The materials mention Professor Jan Hedner, a prominent sleep researcher, described these results as a breakthrough. Why such strong language? What makes this particular finding so significant?
I think the term breakthrough is warranted because it provides such strong validation for a whole therapeutic concept. For so long, as we discussed, OSA was seen mainly through a mechanical lens. CPAP is a mechanical fix. Surgery is a mechanical fix. As Professor Hedna pointed out, this study shows definitively that obstructive sleep apnea can indeed be influenced pharmacologically. It's powerful proof that targeting the body's own control systems, the high loop gain, the muscle responsiveness is a viable strategy. It really marks the beginning of the end for the idea that OSA is only a structural problem.
And does this tie into the more modern view of OSA as not being one single disease, but having different underlying causes in different people, the idea of phenotypes?
Absolutely, it fits perfectly. CPAP works when tolerated because it just blasts the airway open, regardless of why it's collapsing in that particular person. You could call it a one-size-fits-all approach, mechanically speaking. Sulthiame seems much more targeted. Its mechanism, primarily dampening high loop gain and potentially improving muscle tone, suggests it will work best in patients where those are the dominant problems. We know other patients might have OSA primarily due to, say, obesity causing anatomical narrowing, or perhaps very poor muscle function for other reasons.
So the future isn't just finding one magic pill to replace CPAP for everyone.
Probably not. The future is likely more about precision medicine. A patient gets diagnosed with OSA, but then maybe undergoes further testing to understand their specific phenotype. Do they have high loop gain? Okay, Sulthiame might be a great option. Is their primary issue obesity-related airway narrowing? Perhaps a targeted weight loss medication or intervention is better? Is it primarily poor muscle function? Maybe a different drug that specifically targets muscle responsiveness?
So you can end up with a toolkit of different medications.
Exactly. Or even combination therapy, maybe Sulthiame plus another drug targeting a different mechanism. This FLOW trial is like the first major piece of evidence showing that this phenotype-driven pharmacological approach is actually feasible. It opens the door to developing that personalized toolkit.
Okay, so FLOW is a successful phase 2. But that's not the end of the road. What comes next? What are the big limitations of this study that need to be addressed in future research, likely phase 3 trials?
Right. Phase 2 proves the concept and finds the right dose, roughly. Phase 3 needs to confirm the findings in a much larger, more diverse population over a longer period, really nailing down safety and long-term efficacy before regulators will approve it. The main limitations of FLOW point directly to what phase 3 needs to do. Two big things stand out regarding the patient population.
First, you mentioned the exclusion of severely obese patients.
Yes. Phase 3 trials absolutely must include patients with a BMI over 35. This group represents a huge proportion of people with OSA in the real world. We need to know if Sulthiame works as well in them, and crucially, if it's still safe. Obesity can affect drug metabolism and potentially increase risks, so this needs careful study.
And the second population issue.
Diversity. The FLOW trial participants were mostly male, predominantly white, and under 75. Future trials need to actively recruit and enroll a much more representative population, more women, people from diverse ethnic backgrounds, and older adults over 75. We need to be confident the drug works effectively and safely across the board.
Makes sense. What about the duration and looking at those long-term health outcomes like the blood pressure hints?
That's the other critical piece for phase 3. 15 weeks is too short to really see if Sulthiame prevents or improves the long-term consequences of OSA, like persistent high blood pressure or cardiovascular events. Phase 3 trials will need to run for much longer, typically a year or even more. They'll need to track not just AHI, but also those harder clinical outcomes, especially cardiovascular markers, to see if the benefits seen in breathing translate into genuine, sustained health improvements over time. That's a high bar, but essential for demonstrating true clinical value. #tag health tag outro.
This has been a fascinating look, really, at what feels like a pivotal moment in sleep medicine. Just to quickly recap the core finding. The FLOW trial showed that Sulthiame, particularly at the 200 milligram dose, significantly reduced breathing disturbances, improved nighttime oxygen levels, and reduced daytime sleepiness in those most affected by it, all with a manageable safety profile in the group study.
It's significant, not necessarily because Sulthiame will replace CPAP for everyone. CPAP, when tolerated, is still incredibly effective. But it's significant because it offers tangible hope, backed by solid phase 2 data for the enormous number of patients who simply cannot use CPAP. It confirms that we can influence the underlying physiology of OSA with medication. We can target the body's own control systems. That in itself is a major step forward.
So it feels like the era of treating OSA solely with a mechanical approach might be drawing to a close, or at least It won't be the only option anymore. The question shifts, perhaps. It's not if we'll treat sleep apnea with drugs,
Right.
but rather how many different drugs or combinations we'll need in our toolkit to address the specific underlying causes in each individual. We're moving towards a future where treatment might start not just with a CPAP fitting, but with a detailed physiological profile to guide therapy.
Precisely. It's the dawn of personalized medicine in sleep apnea treatment. And this trial is strong evidence that this future is not just theoretical, it's becoming achievable.
And that potential for a targeted, tolerable alternative should be really encouraging news for anyone out there listening who struggled with CPAP. It suggests your difficulty wasn't a personal failure, but maybe just a mismatch between the only treatment available and your specific needs or lifestyle. And now, a tailored solution seems much closer.
A very hopeful message indeed.
We hope this deep dive has helped you understand this exciting development and the future it might hold for treating sleep apnea. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.